Hilchus Tumas Meis Perik Shmini. Soda she'ovad kever b'teicha, which means you have a soda and you know there's a kever there, but you don't know exactly where the kever is. So the din is afra metame b'mago b'masa. The entire soda, the offer is metame b'mago b'masa kebeis hapras. Now a beis hapras is a place where you had a kever, and then you were chayrish this soda which had a kever. So we're chayshish that maybe the machresha schlepped the bones, small bones of the mess, and therefore there could be a bone which is a kaseira which is spread out in the field, and memela it's metame b'mago b'masa. Masha'ik in this field over here there was no charish on this field, but on the other hand we're concerned since we don't know where the kever is, so people walked on it. So it could be the trampling on the field is maybe there's somewhere that there's a bone that came through the trampling. There's a bone of the size of a seira, and therefore again, so it has a din of a beis hapras. That's his din. Nachmo. Soda she'ovet kever b'teicha. You have a soda which has a kever. You don't know where the kever is. So the first thing is afra is metambe b'mago masa. The entire field, the offer is metambe b'mago b'masa. Beis hapras, it has din of a beis hapras, which is a soda shenechresh bo kever, because we're concerned shemen nidish hakever bo. Maybe the kever was trampled, and the memela v'yu as a result of this trampling, atzom is kiseira b'teich afra. There's somewhere spread in the offer of the field. Atzom is the size of a seira. That's din number one, and then there's another din. V'chol hasoda kula. This is the offer of that field. Now v'chol hasoda kula hamayil Allah. If you're mile on any part of that field, is nitma, you become tummy. Because we're chayshish that maybe you're being mile al the oil. Now whether this tumah is a tumah deraisa or a tumah derabanan is an issue. In other words, the pastor's shittas harambam is that it's only a tumah derabanan. In other words, even though we know for sure there's a caver in this field, but nevertheless this tumah is only midrabanan because we're not chayshish. In other words, each part of the field we're not chayshish. Even this din of Suffolk Tumah B'Rishus HaYachid, Sveiki Tommy, according to the Rambam, could be that it's only an Issa a Din Midrabanan. But I'll quote upon him the pastors, the Rambam writes also in Pirush HaMishnayos, that this Din is only a Din Dirabanan. The Rash, on the other end, the Rash holds that it's a Din Diraisa, based on the Din of Suffolk Tumah B'Rishus HaYachid, Sveiki Tommy. So maybe we know that there's a Tumah in this field, we don't know where the Tumah is, so maybe the Din is that the field is the din of Rishus HaYachid, so Sveiki Tommy. I'll call upon him. There's two dinim over here. There's one din is that the offer of this field has a din that we're choishes that maybe there's an etzem k'seira in that offer of the field. That's certainly a din d'Rabbanan. And then there's another din. If you're mile on the field, so you're tummy because we're afraid you're being mile on the oil. And on that there's an issue whether it's Issa d'Raisa or d'Rabbanan. Din d'Raisa or d'Rabbanan. V'chol ha'sod kula ha'mayil aleha nitma. B'imhamed b'teicha oil, and if you put an actual oil on it, on this field, and even if part of the oil is extending outside the field, is nitma kol mashiach boil. And those once you have an oil, before he was talking about you're being mile, you're standing on top of the field, you're being mile on the field. But then also there's another din, if you actually put an oil on top of the field, so we're choshish that maybe the caver is under this oil, so memela, anything that's in the oil, even if the oil extends outside the field, also is tummy. Because shemel ha'oil shehamed ba'isa soda ala kever humal. Because there's a concern that maybe this oil is on the kever. Halacha beis bona babayis va'aliyah al gabav. You built a house on this field which is nevad bokever, and on top of the house there's an upper floor. So here it depends. Let's learn inside first. Im hoye pischa shel aliyah keneget pischa shel bayis. If the door that goes into the upper floor is exactly above the door that goes into the lower floor, there's two doors on top of each other, so then is aliyah teira. The upper floor is teira. Why? Because shafilo hoya hakever tachas mashkif habayis is anyways aliyah teira. Sharehu oil al gabi oil k'meshi yizbar. Now the din is that an oil spreads tumah, and an oil is also choitzes b'fnei tumah. If there's an oil, and there's, let's say, tumor under an oil, and you're standing on top of this oil, even though you're standing directly above the tumor, which is on the bottom, but nevertheless, since you're standing on top of an oil, so the oil spreads, prevents the tumor from going up. That's the din. An oil spreads the tumor under the oil, and an oil prevents the tumor from going up above the oil. A wall is not an oil. A wall, if you have a wall that's, let's say, under the wall there's tumor, so then that tumah would extend as far as it goes. In other words, there's nothing preventing from that tumah from going up. That's the din. So then it's because ve'ela, because v'yeredus, as the din of tumah retzutzo. Now over here you have a bias. You have a bias. Now this bias, if the mess is in the bias, so the bias is tummy. But on the other hand, the aliyah, why should the aliyah be tummy? The aliyah is, there's an oil that's separating the bias from the aliyah. So therefore the aliyah is tor. Now what happens if the oil is not inside the house, but it's rather mamish under the wall of the house? It's under the wall of the house. It's under the wall of the house. So if it's under the wall of the house, so again the aliyah will be tor. In other words, if the tumah is in the house, so the aliyah is tor, because the aliyah, the ceiling of the up down the floor on the bottom is preventing from the tumah going up to the aliyah. If, let's say, the tumah is under the wall of the house, the tumah is under the wall of the house, so again, how is it going to get to the aliyah? The tumah is because ve'ela, because v'yeredus. But here you can have a situation where the tumah is under the wall of the house, of the house that knows the lower floor. Then on top of that lower floor, there's a door. There's a door going into the aliyah, to the upper floor. So when you have to imagine, you have the tumah right under the wall. So that tumah is going up through the wall, because ve'ela, because v'yeredus, and then it reaches a space which is the entrance into the upper floor. Now, if it reaches that space, which is the entrance into the upper floor, so now all of a sudden, on top of that entrance to the upper floor, there's a mashkef, which is an extension of the oil of the upper floor, so the tumah now spreads into the upper floor. So you can have a mitzias where you have a downstairs, and so if the tumah is the inside of the downstairs, so then lepel, the tumah is not going to go up, because lepel there's a wall. Because there's a bechitza, I'm sorry. Masha'inkin, if the tumah is right under the wall, so really under the wall it starts going up. So if there's only wall, so melis, how's it going to get into the aliyah? It goes up and it goes up all the way. Masha'inkin, if there's an entrance in the aliyah. So in other words, imagine that you have a tumah on the bottom, and the wall is on top of that tumah, and now right on top of that wall, which is on top of that tumah, there's the entrance to the upper floor. So then that tumah is going to go into the upper floor. However, if the entrance to the lower floor is exactly below the entrance to the upper floor, they're right above each other, and they're the exact same size. So what would be the worst case scenario? You have a tumah right under the mashkef of the lower floor. In other words, for the tumah to go into the upper floor would have to be that the tumah goes up because it's tumah because v'oila, and then when it reaches the entrance into the upper floor, it goes into the upper floor. Masha'inkin, if the entrance to the lower floor is exactly below the entrance to the upper floor, so the male is not going to go up to the upper floor, because the mashkiv of the lower floor is going to be a mechitza, which is going to prevent the tumah from going up to the upper floor. So that's this din. Let's read the din inside. Bona babayis, you build a house. V'aliyah al gabav, and on top of this house you have an upper floor. Is imhoya pischa shel aliyah keneged pischa shel bayis. If the door that goes into the upper floor is exactly above the door that goes into the lower floor, is aliyah teira. The aliyah is going to be teira. Why? Shafila hoya hakever tachas mashkev abayis. In other words, how is the tumah going to get into the upper floor? It's going to have to go up through the wall and then enter into under the mashkef of the bayis, of the aliyah rather. They have to go into the mashkev of the aliyah, and through that go into the tumah of the upper floor. But afilu haya kever tachas mashkev abayis. Even if we'll assume that the kever is under the mashkev of going into the lower floor, the chaliyah teira. Why? Sharehu oil agabi oil. Because since the mashkev of the lower floor is an oil, so that prevents from the tumah going up. So in other words, if the tumah is inside, so for sure it's not oil. If the tumah is around the walls, which are not connected to the Keneged Pischi Shel Aliyah, again, it's not going to enter. How's it going to enter? The tumah is because v'ela, because v'yeredus. The only concern would be if the tumah is under the wall and it's Keneged, the place of the Aliyah, or the Pesach of the Aliyah. But over here you have a Pesach of the bias. So the Pesach of the bias, which has a mashkev, prevents from that tumah going up to the Aliyah. That's what he's saying. Shafilo yakever tachas mashke v'mayis, so aliyah teira, shari u'el, agabi el, k'meish yizbor. However, if the door going into the lower floor is not really under the door that's going into the other floor, is afu aliyah tmeya. So then the aliyah is tummy. Why? Because shema askufas aliyah lakever. Maybe the askuf of the aliyah, which means the step going into the aliyah, the door, the entrance going into the aliyah is on top of the caver, and the caver varei hu aliyah mahila lakever. So the aliyah is being mahila lakever, because lepel over there there's a door, there's an entrance, and that door has a mashkif. So that mashkif is, so to speak, the tumor is going up through the wall, because the wall is tumor because ve'ela because v'yiredes, and it hits the entrance of the upper floor, and then it goes into the upper floor, because the entrance to the upper floor is an oil together with the rest of the ceiling of the upper floor. Yeah. Halachi Gimel. Soda zu, now this soda, which we said, the soda, which was neved bokever, is mutter lizrea b'techa kol zera, to plant something, seeds, vegetation, any types of zera, all these things are mutter. Why? To plant something which will reach the kever, you're not allowed to. But to plant something which the sharoshi of the zroim are not going to reach that far into the kever, so that's not a concern. To actually to plant a tree, that you're not allowed to. So the Rambam says a tree, a fruit-bearing tree, because the sharoshim, the roots of this tree is going to reach ad lames, and maybe it's also. Now, Be'emes, the Ravid argues, and he says, why dafka Loni Michael? It's also al der is Ilon Srak. That's Losh Lamishn. Losh Lamishn is Ilon Srak as well. The question, why dafka Iloni Michael? Now, and what's the problem if the Sharoshi or Ilon are going to reach Adames? So the Merkavas HaMishnah says that the reason is Iloni Michael is considered you being nana. You're being nana from the mess. If the Sharoshim reach the mess, so that's called you being nana from the mess. Mashanikim Ilon Srak is not called a Hano. Others Tainer, Lachore Ilon Srak is also Hano. Because lepeil, you're being nana, there's an hano from Ilon Israk. So that would also be called a hano. Now sometimes, the Rambam himself writes in Pirush HaMishnayos that there's a concern that if you have Iloni Michael over there, so you might end up eating the fruits over there in the field and on top of the caver, which is a bizoyin ames. Eating the fruits on top of the caver would be a bizoyin ames. But the question is, so if that's the case, why dafke Ilon is a problem? Chur Zroim is also a problem. I mean, there's a place to say that by Zroim, usually if you plant Zroim, so you plant Zroim in the entire field, so Memela, you're not going to really eat there. Mashayk and an Elon, you could eat under the tree, after there would be such a svara. The Ramara brings another svara, that Be'emes, the fact that the tree is going into the mess is not inside Isser Hano, because it's Zev Zagerim. The problem is only, again, that's Bizoyin HaMes. It's a Bizoyin HaMes to have roots that are going into the mess, and being yonik from the mess, not mitzad isher ano. Together with the fact that you may end up eating over there, plus the fact that it's a bizoyin ames, so therefore it's asur. Mashaykin only in the Ilon Israk is not an isur. I'll call upon is diyunim. What's the havana of the Rambam? Why is mechalik between Ilon havana? Why is mechalik between Ilon Michael and Ilon Israk? But I'll call upon it's clear the halacha. The halacha is that zroim you're allowed to plant there, because the sharoshim aren't going to reach to the mess. Mashenk and Ilonis, Ram says Iloni Michael, you're not allowed to plant there, and other Rishenim. The Ravid holds that even Iloni Srak, you also not allowed to plant there. That's din number one. Now it's a new din. This is within the Halachi Gimel, but Chura, it's a new separate din. Hatlulies hakreva le'ir asmucha lebeis hakvaras. Now we learned before that a soda sha'avad b'kever, so there's a chash that obviously there was a kever there, so there's a chash. So every place is a suffix, maybe there's a kever there. Now if you have tlulias are like mounds of earth, and there's a concern that maybe there was a beis hakvaras, so a regular mess was buried in the beis hakvaras. You don't bury a regular mason stamazeh, you bury it in the beis hakvaras, so you're not choishes on a regular place, maybe there's mason there. But on the other hand, there could be a chash that a person that lost a nefel, or there's or a mukeshchin that lost an aver. So lav dafka that they're interested in going all the way to the Beis HaKvaras. There's a concern that they may bury it in a tlulias, like a mound of earth, and over there they'll bury it, even though it's not a Beis HaKvaras, and it's not the person that they bury it over there in these tlulias, in these mounds of earth. Now when are we choishish that they'll bury in a mound of earth. Not every mound of earth you find, you're worried that maybe there's a caver there, or a nafel there. So the Rambam is saying over here like this: Hatluliyes akrevis leir hasmuch lebeis hakvaros. If you have an ear which is samuch lebeis hakvaros, ear samuch lebeis hakvaros means that there's a beis hakvaros within a mil of the city. There's within 2,000 amas of the city, there's a beis hakvaros. And now these kluliyes are close to that city. You have kluliyes outside the city, and they're close to the city. What's pshat? They're close to the city. So we'll soon learn means there's no kluliyes that are closer. There are no kluliyes that are closer. So over here we'll learn that there's a chashash that if a woman had a nafel, so Mela she's going out to the Beis HaKvaros to bury this nafel, and Mela she's going already out of the Beis HaKvaros to bury this nafel. She meets this tlulius, which is the closest tlulius that she finds, and Mela she buries it there. In other words, if we're choshev that she's burying it in the tlulius, she'll bury it in the first tlulius that she finds. So the Mela, so this tlulius, we're choshev that maybe there's a nafel there. Again, if you have a city, if there's no Beis HaKvaros near the city, so she's not really going to the Beis HaKvaros over here to take out the nafel. She'll have to go in a different way, a different place. Masha'inkin, if you have a Beis HaKvaros right outside the city, within the mill of the city, it's samuch leir, and these tlulias are smuches. So that's what he's saying. Let's read again inside. Tlulias akrevis leir. The tlulias which are close to an ear. What kind of ear? An ear which is a smuch lebeis hakvaros. To an ear which is smuch lebeis hakvaros. That's one situation. Or if you have a tlulias l'derech beis hakvaros, you have a derech beis hakvaros. So there could be a possibility of the woman, she's on her way to the beis hakvaros in this derech beis hakvaros, and then she sees a tlulias. So rather than going all the way to the beis hakvaros, she'll go ahead and bury this nafel in these tlulias. Or l'derech beis hakvaros, you have a tlulias which are close to a derech beis hakvaros. Is echad chadoshes v'echad yishonos, whether these are new tlulias that you don't remember seeing before, or yishonos, which means they're already old, which means you already know about it, that they've been there for a while. You don't even remember how long maybe they've been there for. Is harei l'becheskes tumah. So we're always choishish that these tlulias are tumah. Again, we have a city which is kreva l'beis hakvaros, and these tlulias are kreva to that city. Or you have a derech beis hakvaros, and these tlulias are carved to the derech beis hakvaros. So the din is harei l'becheskes tumah. So these tlulias are becheskes tumah. Why? Because women buried the nefolim there, and al derech zeh mukishchin is cave misham evereim, a mukishchin that lost an aver. So that aver is metami, an aver menachai is metami with it. So they're cave misham evereim. But if we're dealing with tlulias which are not kreves to the ear which is smuch lebeis hakvaros, or they're not kreves to the derech which is going to beis hakvaros, so over here it depends. Hachadoshes, if they're new tlulias, which means you know when these tlulias came about, that's such new tlulias, so then they're teres, because they're teres since you know when they became, and they're not kreva leir. The tlulias that are only kreva leir is the chashash. But the ones that are rechekas, there's no kshash, because the isha is not going to go to a rechekas. So therefore the krevis are shoshes. Masha'inkin rechekas aren't. You're not choshesh. However, vayishanis, if we're dealing with tlulias which are old, you really don't know when these tlulias became tlulias. Since you know they were there, so then they're tummy. Why? Because shema hoyu krevis meir shecharva imiderach shavda. Maybe there was a city that was there, and that city was kreva lebeis hakvaros, and this tlulias was close to that city, and memela those tlulias have a din of akshash. In other words, you don't really know when these tlulias came about, so therefore they could have been in a matzav which they have a din of kreves leir, which is smuch lebeis hakvaros, or they were smuch lederech, which was the derech lebeis hakvaros. So therefore, is hayishonis tmei shema hayukrevis meir shecharva emiderach shavda ve'ezu telkar. That's it. So we're making a distinction between chadoshes and yishonis. Ve'ezu telkar. What's considered a telkar? Saying krevis are tamic, krevis are tamic, and rechekas are teheres if it's chadoshes. So ve'ezu telkar kol she'en shom tel acher karav yesim imen. If there's no closer mount, because you go out of a city and the closest mount over there, that's the mound that your choshesh is tumah. But anything further than that, you're not chayshish, because bepashta she's not going to go, or the Mukhe Shechina is not going to go to a further place if he's going to bury it in the Tlulis, or bury it in the first Tlulis. But that's only talking about Tlulis that we know when they happen. So we know these are new Tlulis, and Memela, and there's a city over here, so we know that these Tlulis are chadoshes, and therefore they're rechoikes. So if they're chadoshes, we know they're rechoikes. And Memela, so we're not chayshish. Masha'inkin, if they're yishanis, we don't know that they're really rechoikes, because maybe they were krevis. Shema hoyu krevis miyeh, ve'ezu til, Shema hoyu krevis miyeh shecharim, dar shav, ve'ezu til karev, kol she'en sham til acher karev yesim meno, and ve'yoshem she'en ad muzech. So that's this din of tlulias, that tlulias, if there's tlulias, which are kreva le'ir, and that ear is smuchel beis hakvaris, or they're kreva to a derech of beis hakvaris, so if they're chadoshes, so only the krevis are tummy. Masha'inkin, if the yishanis, so even the rechek is also tummy, because maybe they were once krevis. Halacha dalet. Stay boichem. What's a stay boichem? B'hu amokim hakorv beis hakvaris. It's a place which is near the beis hakvaris. Sha'anoshim yosu shoma boichem. That's where the women, after the levaya, maybe before the levaya, they sit there and cry. Is afal pisha afra tor. The afra b'emes is tor. It doesn't have a din of a sadash of a bakever or a sadash mechlish bakever. Sharei lehuzik kasham tumah. We're not aware of any tumah in this day beichem. But nevertheless, ein noit neise. You don't plant in this day beichem. Ve'ein zeir neise. And you also don't plant vegetation there. You don't plant seeds there. Why? Shalei lahargel regel adam l'sham. Not to bring people there. No, it's not to encourage people to be there. Because Shema Yesham Tumah, there's still a shtikl kshash. There's no real hulgzik sham tumah. As we'll soon learn, you're allowed to use this offer even to make a tanner l'kedesh. And as we're not really choished, there's no real din kshash that it's tummy. But on the other end, Shema Yesham Tumah. Mipnei shu karel beis hakvaris. It's a karel beis hakvaris. So we're not really interested in encouraging that people should come there. No, I'm sorry. Shema Yesham Tumah. Mipnei shu karel beis hakvaris. So memela kvarnis yashem ba'olam mimanu. And since it's a karel beis hakvaris, so people really on the Siyai Shabbat, people don't really think about. They own this piece of land. Normally, when a person owns a piece of land, no one's going to go and bury someone's mess or an ephel or mukashchin in someone else's piece of land. Masha'inkin, what we're dealing with is the beichem, where the owner of the land is really not really thinking of using this land because people use it as a state beichem because it's karel beis hakvaris. So Memela, that's what you're saying. Mepneishu karol beis hakvaris. Memela kvar nesiyai shebolav mimanu. Lefichach, as a result of that, efshe sheyav yodem v'yikbar bey. So there's more of a chash that yav yodem v'yikbar bey. Even though we don't have a yisod for the chash, because we don't know that happened, but there's more of a chash. Is mepnei zeh chosh. And how did they express the chash? They expressed the chash that you shouldn't go ahead and plant trees or plant other things in there, because not to encourage people to get there, because fort, you want to be marking people from tumah. However, you're allowed to go ahead and use this offer for a tanah for kedesh. There's no din tumah over here. There's no cheskas tumah over here. Halacha hey. Kever hanimtza muter lefanoisi. Now normally you're not allowed to be mefana a kever that was buried there, was buried with his shus. So then you're not allowed to be mefana. It's not covered ames, and it's keinem mekeme. Masha'in came if it was a kever animtza. So the pastors you owned the field, and now all of a sudden you realize there's a kever there, and you never knew about it. So the pastors, it was placed there shlei b'rishus. If it would have been put there b'rishus, mustama, you would have known about it. So therefore it's not really keinem mekeme, and therefore mutal lefanesi, you're allowed to be mefana to get the kever out. The impino, once you took the kever out, is still mekemi tummy, because there's a chash that since it was placed there shlei b'rishus, maybe in this kever on the bottom there's another kever, and v'asur b'hanos, you're not allowed to be nana from this kever, even though you took the mess out already, achi yibadik, until you badik to make sure that there's no other kever there. Kameshi is bar, like it will be in this bar. So mele, so there's nachamol. So a kever hanimtza be'etzim, there's no problem lefanese because it wasn't keinem mekeme. But on the other end, we're still not sure that you were mefanet, that there's no other mason there, and therefore it's asur b'anoya, this kever also bano, and once you're beidik it, so then it's mutter bano, because bepashtus was placed there shalei b'rshus, it wasn't really kena mekeme, and even if it's a binyashal bias, there's on top of this kever, also doesn't, since there's no reshus of the bias, so it doesn't have a din of a isur hano. That's din number one, b'negei kever hanimtzo. Now, if a kever hayadua, if you have a kever in your field, which is yadua, you know that there's a kever there. Is also lefanei, so you're not leaving mefanet, because bepashtus, since it's yadua, we could assume that it was kana mekeme. However, in pino, if you did take it out, is mekeme tor. The place is tor because lepel. We assume there's no other mason there, because since it was a kever yadua, bepashtus, there's no other mason there, and also a mutter banoya. So it's mutter banois. Now over here, benegay, this mutter banois is not so clear why it's mutter banois. L'churi was a kaver that was miyuchat for a kaver. So over here also we say that since lepel there was only one kaver there, there's no other mason there. So memela, it's not so clear exactly why in mutter banois. The pashtus advarm, the mess is no longer there. Not clear if we're talking about a kever bekarka. If it's kever bekarka, the pashtus is mutter banois. The karka is not a neseris. While it was acting as a kaver, so then it's also Masha'iki now that there's no mess there, and there's no kshash that there's another mess there. So memela, so it's bepashtus mutter bano, it will be al derech haposh. Halacha vov, kever shu mazik as harab. You have a kever which was a kever yadua, and the pashtus is maybe other kvarim as well. It's not only a singular kever. It was a kever shoyi yadua, and it was kever shu mazik as harab. Doesn't right? Kever shu mazik as harab. There's a kever which is mazik as harab. So the din is mefana, even though normally you're not allowed to be mefana kever, it was only a kever animtzi you're allowed to be mefana, but a kever yadua you're not allowed to be mefana, but over here is mefanim, because it's mazik as a rabbim. In other words, let's say the rabbim has a derech over there, and the pill, as a result of them going on that derech, they're becoming tamei, so mele mefana nesi. However, umekemi tamei, it's still tamei, even though you are mefana it still remains tamei, and v'asir bano, it's not allowed to have a no. Now the pash is, why aren't you allowed to have a no? Because since it was placed there, almanas to remain there, so therefore it's also banoya. But the problem is, before we learned that it's also lefanese. Halacha, we had a din that a kever hayadua. So over there it was also lefanese. Vim pino is mekemi tor umuter banoya. So over there it says the side of mekemi tor and side is muter banoya if you were mefanet. And over here, the kever, which is mazik harab, which is mutal fanese, so we're saying umikoy mitami v'aser banoya. Now the ma'ase is that the pashtus and halacha vav, we're talking about a kever shu mazik harab, but that kever could be it's part of a there's more kvarim there. So b'negeya a kever hayadua, even though we say that you ain't mefanese because b'pashtus maybe there was reshus to put it in there, but since lepel it was only one kever. Since it was one kever, the pashtus, it was put there almanas that you'll be able to build a fanese. That's what they bring the svara. That since it was only one kever, there's a svara that the pashtus, it was put there almanas lefanese. And since it was put there almanas lefanese, so once you're mefanet, it's muter banoya. And once you're mefanet, it's also it's not tummy because you were mefanet already. Masha'inkin, this kever shumasik is a rab. We're not talking about it was a kever, it was a singular kever. It was a kever that definitely was put there le'al manas l'fanese, but nevertheless it's mutter l'fanese because it's mazik as a rab. So now enoch nami, you took it out and you were mefanet, but since it was put there le'al manas l'fanese, so memela it's aser banoya, and because it's aser banoya, they were geyser tum on it because in order not to be nana from it. In other words, we're afraid that if you're not going to be geyser tum, people will be nana. So therefore, they were geyser tumah in order for people not to be nana. So that's the two dinim. Over there, we're talking about a kever hayadua, one kever that's yadua. So even though it's also lefanese because lepel is yadua, but on the other end, if you mefanet, so it's mutter bano because then there's a svara that it was made there in order to be mefanet. That's why it's mutter bano. So even though also lefanese, but with the evid, if you were mefanet, it's mutter bano. Once it's mutter bano, there's no reason for it to be tummy. Because lepel, there's no kever there anymore. Masha'in came by a kever, which is mazik harab over there. The pashtus, we know the kever wasn't put on manas lefanese. It's just that the reason why it's mutal lefanese is because it's mazik harab. So over here, even though you are mefanet, it still remains aser bano, and because it's aser bano, so therefore it's also metami. That's how you have to learn pshat. Halacha zayin hapigea b'mes mitzvah. Someone is traveling. And he sees a mess mitzvah, he sees a mess that died, and is somewhere in the middle. There's no one else to be makaber. So the din is im motzei b'techat tchum. If he found him in the tchum, because it's within the tchum of a city, is mivil beis hakvaros. So then he brings him back to the beis hakvaros. Doesn't bury him there, since it's b'techat tchum. He brings the beis hakvaros. However, motzei chutz l'tchum. If he finds this mess chutz l'tchum, afilu b'stei karkim, even if it's a field that grows karkim, which karkim is an expensive type of vegetable, type of grass, that's a shod, it's a big hefsed to bury someone b'teil stei karkim. But nevertheless, that's the din. That mitzvah is kenim mekemi, is afilu b'teil stei karkim konim mekemi, and we cover b'makom shenimtzu. So he's buried in the place where he's found. Nochamos. So if you find him as mitzvah, if he's b'teichat tchum, you bring him to beis hakvaros, and if he's outside the tchum, then he's kenim mekemi. Even if in the stei karkim, which is a hefsed, nevertheless he's kenim mekemi. Now motzi ala meitzer, he found him on the gvul. The gvul, the Ramar says meitzer means that we're talking about like a field. And there's a derech al kopanim, a derech between one field and another field. That's the meitzer, and that's the boundary. It's the boundary between two fields, and in that boundary between the two fields, there is a derech. So the din is misalkel is dodim. You don't bury him in the middle of the derech, because that's a hezek l'rabim. We learned before that if you have even a soda which has a kaver, and then now all of a sudden it's a hezek l'rabim, you're allowed to be mefanet. So over here also, you're not going to go ahead and bury him on this meitzer, on this which is a derech. Now, to which field do you bury him? If there's two options, so we say hazeh. Stay bor mitzad a soda which is completely empty, and it's not plowed. It's a field that nothing was done to it. Or stay near mitzad and on the other side you have a plowed field, a field which is ready to be planted. So kavri b'stei bor, you should rather bury it in the stei bor. And you have the choice where to bury it, and the fields belong to different people. Maybe even is kavri b'stei bor. Stay near v'stei zera. You have one field which was plowed and ready to be planted, but the other field was already planted and things are growing. So then, kavri b'stei near. Then you bury him in the stay near, in the field that wasn't planted yet. Now, stay zera v'stei kerem. You have a field was planted with vegetation, and then you have a field that was planted that has a vineyard. Is kavri b'stei zera. So you should rather bury him in the stay zera. Stay ilon or stay kerem. If they have the two choices, you have a field that has trees and a field that has a vineyard. Is kavri b'stei kerem. Why? What's the ma'ila? Mipnei oyel atuma. Because the field, if you're going to bury him in a field which has trees, so over there the trees have very high branches. So there's a chash that maybe the branch will go over the kever and someone will walk and become tummy. Mashenkin the kerem doesn't grow so high. So maybe it doesn't grow so high. So there's not really such a serious chash that there's going to be an eilatuma. That nachamol stay ilon or stay kerem. If you have two choices, the stay ilon or stay kerem is kavri b'stei kerem. You bury him in the stay kerem. Mipnei eilatuma. Now hoyu shneim shavim. They were both equal. Both of them were the same type of field. Is kavri le'ezet tzatshi yutza. So then you bury him wherever you want. Halacha ches kever haninza. If you find a kever, now the question is, how long has the kever been there? Mimela, how long is people that passed this kever? How long are they tummy? How long ago are they tummy? So we say kever and nimtza mitamel b'freya. So the mitamel b'freya, they go as far back as until someone knows that there was no kever there. So we say that it's tummy. It's mitamel b'freya. How vimbo echad v'amar. If someone comes along and says, "Borili shalei hoyakam kever," I remember when there was no kever. Afilu kedim les mishanim, even 20 years ago. So the din is any metame el mishas mitziavel. Then it's only metame mishas mitziavel. Nachamo. A person finds a kever. So we say how long is the kever there? We go back as far as we can. But we say that the kever has been there since we don't know how long. It goes back as far. We don't know. Masha'inken, if we know there's a person that we know that he says he remembers that there was no kever here. He knows 20 years ago there was no kever here. And now he knows that now there's a kever there. The question is, when did this kever happen? So we say the kever happened from now on. We don't go back 20 years. Because since he knows when there was no kever, and now we know when there is a kever, so we don't go back. And we say from now on it's tummy. But backwards we don't have tummy. Why? Because there's the chazak and the mikara. And since there was becheskas that there was no kever there, there was becheskas, there was no kever there. So even though now we have a kever, so if we don't have that, there was the becheskas, there was no kever there, so we go bust of the fact that there's a kever. So we call it chazaka dehashta. Now we know there's a kever there, so we go back as far as we can. Mashenkin, if there's a chazaka demikara, we know for sure there was no kever there. So then we go. So then we go. Basa chazaka demikara. Chazaka demikara is stronger than chazaka dehashta. When do we go basa chazaka dehashta? If there's no chazaka demikara, that's what it says here in the Rambam. But the shaila is the obvious shaila that l'chura we always know that there was no kever there. When the Eibishter created the world, there was no kever there. So there was once a time that there was no kever. Now we know there is a kever. So we would have no person coming along and telling us that we remember when there was no kever, but we know that there was no kever. We know that b'shas B'riyas Elam there was no kever. So memela, so right now we have a kever. We have a chazaka demikara that there was no kever. So memela, so l'chura we know that there was no kever. So l'chura, let's go basar chazaka demikara, not chazaka dehashta. Why is chazaka demikara only work if there's someone around that says he remembers when there was no kever? That's the shaila. So I see the Rambam Maharil brings from the Merei Misada, from the Netziv, that he says, if someone's coming along and saying that he saw that there was no kever, so he saw there was no kever. So you go basa chazaka demikara. We're figuring out that there was once no kever, because b'shas, but we not have anyone that says that he saw that there was no kever. So then that's like the b'chinas shmiyah. We're seeing there is a kever, and we know that there was no kever. So memela we don't go basa chazaka demikara of that against the chazaka dehashta of Riyah, which is like a very shver svara to say. Akilu, like the fact that there was once no kever is only b'chinas shmiyah, not b'chinas Riyah. Obviously, we all know it's the same madrega of knowing of Riyah. We know from shmiyah that there was once no kever there. How could you say that this is not in the same madrega of Yediyah? Akilu, the fact that you know there is a kever now is not on the same madrega like you know there was once no kever. I mean, l'chura, you know, in the same madrega, it's hard to understand that there should be a difference. L'chura, you're going to have to say that the pshat is that chazaka demikara doesn't work on based of knowledge that we assume the knowledge. In other words, we go along, we say there was someone that saw the matzav, so at that point in time there became the din chazaka. Whereas when nobody knew about it, there didn't become a hilchas, a chazaka. When someone knows about it, so we say, now I know that this is the matzav, and from now onwards there's a din chazaka. Masha'inkin, if no one knew the matzav, there's nobody that we can say knew the matzav. So we're coming back and we say, well, there was one such, we know the matzav now, and we know now that there was one such a matzav. Say, we know now that there was one such a matzav. But when the matzav was there was no one that knew it. So then, vice versa, the chazaka demikara doesn't work against the chazaka dehashta al kol panim. If there's no chazaka dehashta that goes against, we do know. We say certain things we know that was because the pashtas, that's what it was. Masha'in came, all kinds of dinim, Aishes, Becheskes, Psula, all kinds of dinim that we know. It's not because there's someone new. That's the Messias. We know the Messias is that's how a person is born. Now there is other things. Masha'in came, if it's against a chazaka dehashta, so then we're saying that a chazaka dehashta could go against a chazaka demikara if the chazaka demikara was established by a person knowing, but not. Right now we're talking about l'achra ma'isa, and now we're talking about the matzav of the way it was a chazaka demikara. There was no mitzias of the chazaka demikara until right now when we're talking about chazaka dehashta. I'll quote one, maybe. Halacha tes kol ha'moitzi kever a mess a dover shemetami bo'oil min hames. So someone finds a kever, a mess. Pashas means a mess that's buried somewhere or another that doesn't have a din of a kever. I'm not really sure that's here. Because he finds a kever means he digs and he sees that there was a kever there. Over here, a mess means somewhere or another he knows that it's really not a kever or wasn't made as a kever. But on the other end, there's a mess that's buried in the ground. I mean, if he's not buried in the ground, you find him above ground. So obviously, you're not making a tzion on him. You're going to have to go bury him. Kolametzi kever a mess yidavar shemetami bo'oil min hames. And again, it's something which you could be going through and not realizing that he's there. So the din is chayav l'tzayin. You have to make a tzion, you have to make market to see that that is there. Kedei shalei yiyet hakol alacher, that nobody should be nichshel and become tummy, which passing this kaver or this mess or this part of the mess, which is metame be'oil. Now, if you go ahead and find something, you see something which could be metame b'mago b'masa, so there's no kshash, because the pale people see it. Mago b'masa, you'll see it. Masha'inkin oil is a kshash that you're not going to see it. L'chura. Not sure exactly this seer of davar shemetame ba'oil min hames or a mess which is not a kever. And I'll call upon him. Then the Rambam says, this was something, but the Rambam said it already in Hilchos Shvisas Yontif, that's when they would send out shluchim to go ahead and be mitzayim al akvaris. Ein mitzayin al kezayis mitzumtzum ames. If there's a kezayis mitzumtzum ames, and it's in the ground, so we're not worried that people are going to become tamil fisher sefer yachse baritz, because it's obviously constantly decomposing. So eventually it will be less than a kezayis very shortly. Ubamem mitzayim, what material do you use to be mitzayim to market? Besid with lime. Mimachi, you mix up the lime with water. V'sheifach al mekei matuma. You pour it over the mekei matuma, and memela it's like white, a whitish color over the mekei matuma. Memela, people know that it's tummy. Now, ema midnas atzion al gabi atuma. You don't put the tzion actually on the tumah itself, because there's a concern that a person is not going to realize that there's a tzion there, and by the time he finds out there's a tzion, he's going to be tummy already. The tzion should be extend outside the tumah. So in other words, a person should realize before he gets to the tumah, or right as soon as he gets to the tzion, he'll realize there's a tzion and he didn't yet reach the tumah. In order that a person should be mafsataris, a person is walking with Torah-dika things, and Mele is going to be going on a mess, so it's going to become tummy, or he's going to not realize he's tummy and he's going to touch taris. I mean, Pashas we're talking about, he's going to realize but the concern is that he's holding taras, and those taras are going to become tummy. So on one hand, you're not only mitzayin the tumah, you have to do a little bit outside the tumah. But on the other hand, you don't want to make it too far. So people aren't able to walk here. No, so you're being mafsed Eretz Yisrael. That's the number one. The mitzayin is havadois. You don't have to be mitzayin when there's vadei tumah. When it's known tumah and it's a vadei tumah, sharehen you're doing lakil. Everybody knows that there's tumah there. Over here, we're talking about a place that there was a suffix tumah. There's a suffix tumah. Ella ala sveikas. When there's a suffix tumah, soda sha'avid bar kever. If you have a soda which was avid bar kever, or v'haschoches v'aprois, you have things that are sticking out from the trees or from the walls, and you know that there's tumah under one of these choches or tumah under one of these prois, but you don't know where. So then you have to be with scientists and know that all these places are a suffix tumah. There's a suffix tumah here. Now there is a kever. If there's a suffix, maybe there's a kever. It's a soda she'avid b'kever. Halacha yud. Matzah soda mitzuyanis. You found a soda which is mitzuyan. You see a marker over it. What is the marker telling us? If there's no trees here, is biyadua shavat b'kever. So we see, because we know a soda shavat b'kever, you're not allowed to plant any trees. So if there's no trees, we could assume that Mustama, this is a soda shavat b'kever, and that's why they don't plant any trees there. However, yesh ba'ilonis, if there are trees, is biyadua shenechrish b'kever. The reason why there's a marker is because it has little beis apras. It was a soda shenechrish b'kever, k'meshi is bur. So a soda shenechrish b'kever, so is a din that it's matame b'mago b'masa. A soda she'avid b'kever is also matame b'oil. Is a chashash oil. Halacha yud aleph. Motza even achas mitzuyenes. You found a stone, and you see that on top of this stone there's a tzion. There's this marker of this sid which is poured out on it. So we assume tachteh tummy. Under this, the stone is tummy. Agam, we said before that normally they would make a tzion further outside of the tumah, not only on the tumah, but that's only talking about when it's on the ground. Masha'inket over here when it's on a stone, so the stone is evidence. So there's no concern if you make a tzion on top of the stone. So you could assume that when a person is going to get near the stone, before he gets to the stone, he'll realize that there's tumah there. Now hoyishtaim, if there were two stones and each stone had a tzion, is im yesh sid beineim, if there is sid in between the two stones, so we assume beineim tummy. So the both of them are tummy. The stones are tummy, and between the stones are also tummy. However, if im ein sid beineim, there's no sid in between the stones. You have two stones, and each stone has sid on it, but there's no stone sid in between them. Ella al rashayim, only on top of the stone there's sid. Zazeh. Im yesh cheres beineim, if you find shards, broken pieces of cheres, so then Torah, even the stones are Torah. Because she'ein zeh labini, we could assume that this sid that came there wasn't a sid of a tzion, we see that it's like a place where there's rubble, there's like broken up things. So the Mele Bepashtus, the sid on the stones are also from binyan. However, if there's no cheres in between the two stones, there's no broken up cheres, and sid meruded al resheim mikan mikan, and there was sid placed on the stones from both sides, is a rezet tzion. So then we assume that is a tzion, and the tame, and therefore under the stones is tame, is nachmos. So if you find one stone that has a tzion, we assume it's tame. You find two stones that have a tzion, and between them there's also a tame, a tzion, so we assume side the stones are tame, and side between the stones are tame. If you find two stones that have a tzion, and between them there's no tzion, so if there's a broken up piece of cheres there, so we could assume that nothing is tummy. It's just a broken building site. And that's why there's sid there. Masha'inkin, if there's no cheres in between, so then we could assume that those titzuyunim on the stones are takatami. Now, matzah meitzer echad mitzuyin, you found a meitzer, in other words, a boundary around the field that's mitzuyin. So we say hu tami, the place of the boundary, the place of the tzion, that's tami. And that's it, the fact that we're not going to go ahead and make the whole Soda Tameh based on the fact that there's a line of Sid, next a straight line next to the field. Now, even if you have two lines, you have two boundaries around the field, and they both have Tzion, so also we're not going to make the entire field Tameh. And even if you have three fields, three boundaries, in other words, you have like a shape of a ches, and there's a shape of a ches of tzion, so you're not going to say because there's a shape of a ches of tzion, so the entire field inside this ches is also mitzuyon. However, motza bas mitzuyon, if you found that the four sides of the field are you have like a mem, you have a complete closed box, and there on all four sides there's a tzion, so then we say hein teherim, we say under the tzion is tar. Because we said before that the tzion should be outside the tumah. There should be a tzion outside the tumah. It's hein to hein. So the tzion itself is tor. And the soda is tamei. You're not marking the tzion in makom to make it very far. So we assume that the entire field is tamei, but the tzion itself, which is around the field, that the tzion, you're mitzayin outside the tumah as well. So therefore we assume that the tzion is tamei, and the field which is inside, I'm saying the tzion is tor, the tzion is tor, and the field inside is tamei.